the Jewish Jesus, and you made a statement in which you said that one of the most important things for us to understand about the Jewish Jesus was that at a very early age he studied the Scriptures, the Old Testament, committed most of this material to memory, and that he studied it in Hebrew and that he spoke Hebrew. Now this basically runs counter to everything that most students in our Bible colleges and seminaries have been taught for about the last 150 years. On what basis do you make that statement?
Well, first of all, I think you have to realize that a kind of legend developed about the whole subject of the language which we call Aramaic. Aramaic is a Semitic language. It was the language that people were speaking in Babylon when the Jews were taken captive there. And when they returned to the land after 70 years, it was supposed by scholars for a long, long time they must have brought the language with them, brought Aramaic back as a principal language. There were many Jews later on in Babylon, in that area, who did use Aramaic as their main language. But those that came back after 70 years were apparently still speaking Hebrew, even in their homes all that time. And so what we really have is a kind of misunderstanding. It has been supposed that Aramaic was the main language. There are many reasons to think that it was not. Dr. Frank Cross, for example, says that there are very good reasons to think that the people coming back from Babylon spread out around the Judean hills in that area. We have many of the names of the villages where they went, and that their main language was Hebrew and continued to be Hebrew. There are many other reasons to think that there was Hebrew. Hebrew was a spoken language, somewhat modified from the old biblical kind of Hebrew, but still very, very real Hebraic language. We have in the New Testament many little hints of this. I can give a great many such suggestions, but one, for example, and one that I found early in working with the Gospels, was the simple fact that a number of Hebrew words appear under a kind of the Greek range of meaning in many places. For example, we have one in the 23rd chapter of Matthew, the first 2 or 3 verses. Jesus says, the scribes and the Pharisees, and that we have a translation, sit on the seat of Moses. And that is a present tense. But the Greek says, is an aorist tense. It means sat. The scribes and Pharisees sat on Moses' seat. And whatever they say to you and to do. But don't act like them. Now, the point of the whole thing is that word sit is not a direct translation of the aorist. It should be sat. But if you say sat, everybody would know that the translation would be meaningless. So you have to say, if you're really going to get closer to the truth of it, you should translate the aorist, which is not normal and wouldn't be correct, Greek speaking. You would have to say, the scribes and Pharisees have sat down. Now this is an old Hebrew idiom. To take over the seat of Moses is to sit down on the seat. But you then have to use the perfect. The minute you put the Greek text back into Hebrew, the perfect tense and the Hebrew idiom comes out beautifully. And we say simply this: the scribes and the Pharisees have taken over the authority of Moses. That's what it means. And the very use of the tenses in the Greek can be explained only on the basis of an original Hebrew. There are many, many such things.
What was it that led you in your studies to come to this conclusion?
Well, I was working on the Gospel of Mark. And when I began translating the Gospel of Mark to Hebrew, I was working on a new translation. I started many years ago, and back in 1959, actually. And as I was translating the Greek text of the Gospel of Mark, I noticed that the Greek had a word order that was like Hebrew. Now, I did my studies in classical Greek originally, and classical Greek is a particular kind of language that has it has a case system for the nouns. It has a highly developed verbal system. The case system means that you can look at a word in its ending and tell how it should be translated in any given place or in any given spot in the text. However, in ancient Greek, because of this, you could put your words in the sentence anywhere you wanted to. Now, Hebrew is like English. English has to have a certain word order, or we don't understand what things mean. We therefore use a certain kind of word order, and so does Hebrew. And if you don't have that word order, you're lost, because you don't have a case system at the end of your nouns. As one of we have prepositions in Hebrew and in English. We have practically very few prepositions in many ways in the ordinary text of ancient classical Greek. And later on it began to develop with prepositions. In the text of your Greek text of the New Testament, we find many developing prepositions. In other words, you can take the Hebrew preposition and match it to the Greek text. So you translate your Greek text and you're getting prepositions, you're getting other kinds of things, word order. That's just like Hebrew. That's what I found in the Gospel of Mark. I had some other problems later. I began to see that there were Greek texts or Greek words that didn't fit Hebrew, but these were incidental sort of things. The basic word order was Hebraic. It was a Greek text with Greek words, but the Hebrew was there. And so it was in Matthew and in Luke. Again and again, I can take any person who wishes to listen to it, take the Greek text and show these Hebrew types of writing. When you put it back into Hebrew, you get good text.
In other words, the Greek is poor Greek. That actually what it is Hebrew in Greek dress.
That's exactly right.
Now, that raises an interesting question, and that is that we have many Greek scholars that are well acquainted with the New Testament in Greek. How is it that they have not recognized that this material was Hebrew?
Well, in my own experience, I had been using Hebrew for many years, preaching in it, speaking in it, in my own congregation in Jerusalem, and working on translations of books from English to Hebrew with people that were experts in Hebrew. And so in my own experience, I felt these things because I was a Hebrew speaker. The average person who learns English is like me when I first learned Greek. Who learns English, who learns Greek, I'm saying. The average person who learns Greek as an English speaker learns it from an English point of view. That's the way I learned Greek to begin with. And I early discovered in trying to translate classical Greek that I have had a lot of trouble because I couldn't put it easily into flowing English. And the same thing happened in Hebrew when I was working. Now, I don't expect and don't think that very many people would have my experience. Very, very few. Some Jewish people living in Jerusalem and speaking Hebrew would be people who would be more like me, and I eventually did find people that helped me along this line because they knew both Greek and Hebrew.
And so actually the key is knowing not just the Greek, but you have to know the Hebrew as well. Do many scholars in Israel today recognize this as being the fact?
Well, there are a number of such scholars in Jerusalem and in Israel, but as a matter of fact, most of the scholars who write about the Bible live not in Jerusalem and do not think of Hebrew as being reflected behind the Greek text of the Gospels.
Well, I realize that's true across the country as a whole, but just in Israel itself and among the Israeli scholars who are working with the New Testament text,
yes.
in the words of Jesus, is this a general consensus of opinion among them?
Any Hebrew-speaking person who picks up a Greek text and starts to work with Greek will see the Hebraic underlie of the thing.
I just want to confirm what you're saying in an interesting experience that I had here at the University of Texas a number of years ago when I first started my Hebrew studies. I had been taught, of course, in college that the language of the New Testament was Greek, and one day one of the professors at the university, just quite out of the clear blue and in no context in anything that we were studying, mentioned something about the New Testament being Hebrew and the language of Jesus Hebrew. And so another student and I cornered him after the class was over and said, didn't you make a mistake? Didn't you intend to say Greek or Hebrew? And he was quite amazed that anybody had ever thought that it was Greek in the first place. As a matter of fact, he found it difficult to believe that anybody had ever thought that it was Greek in the first place, and he did not even know of this Greek theory.
But he was probably a Jewish person.
Oh, he was an Israeli.
Israeli who knew Hebrew.
Yes, an Israeli who was teaching at the university in the Hebrew Studies program, and he had never even been introduced to this whole idea of the...
Yes, it's very easy to take an Israeli, show him the Greek text, and start translating word by word into Hebrew, and say, oh, that sounds like Hebrew.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lindsey. Now, in our last biblical field report, we concluded